December 1888, northern Minnesota. While neighbors burned through mountains of firewood just to survive, one Norwegian immigrant built something they called insana, second wooden shell, completely surrounding his cabin, leaving 3 feet of dead air between the walls. The ridicule was instant and brutal. Olaf Henrikson ignored them all. He'd spent 15 years building ships in Bergen, Norway, learning secrets about moisture, airflow, and wood preservation that fishing boats depended on for survival. When he arrived at Pine Ridge Settlement in spring 1887, he watched his first Minnesota winter with a shipbuilder's eye on. What he observed disturbed him deeply. Every family followed identical cabin design, chinked logs, stone fireplace, mud packed between timbers. They burned 8 to 10 cords of firewood per winter and still shivered through January. But Olaf noticed something worse than the cold itself. Their firewood was damp. Not soaking wet, but damp enough to hiss when thrown on flames. Damp enough to produce half the heat it should, creating thick smoke that made children cough through frozen nights. The wood sat outside under tarps that let wind and snow penetrate. By midwinter, even seasoned cordwood absorbed enough moisture to cut burn efficiency by 40%. The families blamed Minnesota's brutal climate. Olaf knew better. The problem wasn't the cold outside. It was failing to protect the resources that fought the cold. So in December 1888, he began his mad project. He surveyed his cabin, then erected vertical posts exactly 3 feet from each wall, 10 feet tall, sunk 2 feet into frozen ground. Between these posts he nailed horizontal boards, creating what looked like a second, larger cabin surrounding the first. His neighbor Jacob Lindström, a Swedish carpenter with 20 years frontier experience, stopped by on day 3. "Henrikson," Jacob said patiently, "you're wasting lumber. That outer shell won't keep you warmer. You just built twice the wall to lose heat through." Olaf kept nailing. "Perhaps we'll see come January." What Olaf built had a Norwegian name, Luftgap Isolationsgener, gap insulation, but it was more than insulation. It was a complete environmental control system disguised as simple wood construction. The 3-foot gap served multiple engineered purposes. First, the airspace created a thermal buffer. Cold air had to pass through the outer shell, then cross 3 feet of relatively still air before reaching his cabin walls. That alone cut direct heat loss by 30%. But Olaf went further. He designed the outer structure with deliberate ventilation, small gaps at ground level, larger vents near the roofline. Air could flow through, but weather could not. Snow might drift against outer boards but never touch his cabin walls. Inside that 3-foot gap, Olaf began stacking cordwood systematically. Each split log stood on end, bark side out, creating rows, allowing air circulation. The wood sat protected from direct snow and rain, while deliberate ventilation created constant gentle airflow carrying moisture away. The physics were simple. Wood below 18% moisture content burns efficiently, releasing approximately 7,000 BTUs per pound. Wood above 25% moisture burns poorly, releasing perhaps 4,500 BTUs per pound while creating excessive smoke. Olaf was storing fuel, burning 73% more efficiently than what neighbors fed their fires. And he accomplished it with 6 extra labor days and 200 board feet of lumber. Lumber that would pay for itself within 1 winter. But his neighbors didn't understand this yet. They just saw a man who'd wrapped his house in an oversized shed, and they thought him foolish. By Christmas, 1888, Pine Ridge reached consensus. Henrikson built the stupidest structure anyone had seen. At the settlement's holiday gathering, ridicule became public. Jacob Lindström stood before assembled families, doing mathematics for all to see. That Norwegian has used 43% more lumber than his cabin required. He's got enough wood in that outer shell to build a proper barn. Instead he's got air. 3 feet of empty air. The crowd murmured agreement. Resources on the frontier weren't abundant. Every nail, every board had to count. William Hutchkins, who'd built 17 cabins across Minnesota territory, shook his head slowly. "I have chinked logs so tight you couldn't slide a knife blade between them. That man's outer boards are loose. He'll freeze worse than any of us." Even the settlement minister weighed in during a sermon. "The Lord values wise stewardship of resources. He does not favor those who build monuments to vanity while practical needs go unmet." Olaf's wife, Ingrid, felt the social pressure most. At the women's quilting circle, conversations quieted when she entered. One afternoon, Martha Lindström spoke what others were thinking. "Ingrid, dear, you must talk sense to your husband. All that work, all that lumber, for nothing." Ingrid simply smiled. "We'll see. Winter will tell us what's wise and what's foolish." But privately, even Ingrid had moments of doubt. The outer structure cost them $240, nearly half their annual income. If Olaf was wrong, they'd be financially crippled and socially humiliated. Olaf seemed unbothered. He continued stacking cordwood with methodical precision. When neighbors passed making jokes, he simply nodded and kept working. What neighbors didn't know, Olaf kept careful records. Daily, he noted temperature, wind direction, humidity. He measured moisture content of stored wood using techniques learned on the docks. His wood was drying steadily, measurably drying. Even in winter's depths, proof wouldn't come from measurements. Proof would come from survival. And in January 1890, proof arrived with brutal force. January 17th, 1890 began with eerie stillness. Wind that had howled for weeks suddenly died. The sky turned a peculiar pale color. Old-timers recognized immediately. Storm coming. Bad one. They were wrong. It wasn't just bad. It was catastrophic. The blizzard striking January 18th came with winds exceeding 60 miles per hour and temperatures plunging to 37 below zero. Snow exploded horizontally, driven by winds so fierce men couldn't stand upright, couldn't see hands before faces. For 3 days, Pine Ridge was cut off from the world. In the Lindstrom cabin, Jacob fed the fireplace every 20 minutes, pulling wood from his outdoor lean-to. The wood was frozen solid, coated with ice. When thrown on fire, it hissed and steamed, producing more smoke than heat. Cabin temperature hovered around 52 degrees. Cold enough, the family slept in winter coats. In the Hutchkins household, William had run low on firewood and was burning green wood. The fire smoldered, more than burned. Interior temperatures dropped to 48 degrees. His youngest daughter developed a deep cough that wouldn't stop. But in the Henrikson cabin, something different was happening. Olaf awakened the first storm morning and walked calmly to his outer structure. Wind screamed outside, but within the 3-foot gap, air was merely moving, not raging. He selected dry wood from stored stacks wood that had been seasoning in this protected space for over a year. The pieces felt light in his hands, properly cured. He carried an armload inside and built his fire. The wood caught immediately, burning hot and clean with minimal smoke. Flames roared up the chimney with bright, intense heat only truly dry wood produces. By mid-morning, his cabin reached 68 degrees. By afternoon, it held steady at 70. He fed the fire every 45 minutes instead of every 20. His carefully stacked cordwood performed exactly as calculated. On the afternoon of day 2, Jacob Lindstrom struggled through chest-deep snow to check on the Henriksons. He expected to find them suffering like everyone else. Instead, when Olaf opened the door, a wave of genuine warmth rolled out into frigid air. Jacob stood stunned. The cabin was warm, actually warm. Ingrid was cooking without her coat. Children played on the floor in regular clothes. "How?" Jacob asked simply, voice barely a whisper. Olaf gestured toward the outer structure where rows of seasoned cordwood stood protected. Wood stays dry. Dry wood burns hot. Hot fire needs less fuel. Simple. Jacob stood silent, calculations running through his mind. He'd already burned through 2 full cords in 2 days. That gap dot, it's not just insulation. It's storage protection. Your whole winter supply seasoning under cover. Yes, Olaf said. And the airspace keeps cabin walls dry too. No frost, no rot. This cabin will last 50 years. Maybe more. Jacob returned to his freezing cabin with new understanding. He'd been wrong. They'd all been wrong. But pride is difficult to surrender, and he said nothing to others. Not yet. The storm broke on day 4. When families emerged, they found Pine Ridge transformed. Snowdrifts reached cabin eaves. Cordwood supplies across the settlement were devastated, not just burned through, but ruined. Wood stored outside was now ice-logged, frozen solid, nearly impossible to burn. Olaf Henrikson stepped from his double-shell structure with his children, all warm and well-fed. His firewood supply remained abundant, dry, ready. He'd consumed perhaps 1.5 cords, half what neighbors burned. Questions began that very afternoon. Word of the Henrikson family's remarkable comfort spread quickly, but skepticism died hard. People needed measurable, undeniable evidence. Jacob Lindstrom decided to conduct proper investigation. On February 3, 1890, he arrived at the Henrikson homestead with a proposal. "I want to measure everything. Temperature, wood consumption, moisture, and I want to compare it to my own cabin." Olaf agreed immediately. For 3 weeks, Jacob made daily visits. He brought a spirit thermometer ordered from Minneapolis. Each morning at sunrise, noon, and sunset, he recorded temperatures in both cabins. The results were stunning. The Henrikson cabin maintained average interior temperature of 68 degrees. The Lindstrom cabin averaged 54 degrees. That 14-degree difference represented the gap between genuine comfort and mere survival. Jacob also tracked firewood consumption with meticulous precision. Over those 3 February weeks, the Henrikson household burned approximately 3/4 of a cord. The Lindstrom household consumed 1 3/4 cords, more than double. The mathematics were irrefutable. Extrapolated across a full winter, Olaf would burn roughly 4 cords. Jacob's family would burn 9 cords for comparable warmth. In a region where cordwood sold for $6 per cord, that represented savings of $30 per winter, enough to buy a milk cow or a year's supply of flour. But perhaps most revealing was moisture content analysis. Olaf's cordwood showed moisture between 12 and 15%. Jacob's would tested between 26 and 32%. Jacob knew what this meant. Wet wood doesn't just burn poorly, it actively works against the fire. Every pound of water requires approximately 1,000 BTUs of heat energy just to evaporate before the wood can begin burning. The Lindstrom family wasn't just burning wood. They were burning wood too, dry wood too, burn wood. Hideously inefficient. On February 24th, Jacob presented his findings at the settlement's community hall. 37 people attended, nearly every adult in Pine Ridge. I was wrong, he began simply. Henrikson's construction isn't wasteful. It's brilliant. He walked them through the numbers: temperature differential, fuel savings, moisture content comparisons. He explained how the 3-foot air gap reduced direct heat loss. He described how protected storage kept firewood dry and burnable at peak efficiency. William Hutchkins raised his hand. But that still doesn't change the fact he used 40% more lumber. It'll take years to recoup construction costs. Jacob shook his head. I calculated that too. At current prices, the structure pays for itself and saved fuel within 3 winters. After that, it's pure savings: $30 a year. Every year. He paused. And that's not counting the other benefits. The outer structure serves as workshop. The space isn't wasted, it's multi-purposed. And his cabin walls show no frost damage, no rot. That double shell keeps the structure dry. My cabin already has moisture problems. Piss could last 50 years. Mine might need major repairs in 10. The room fell silent. Martha Hutchkins spoke up. My daughter's cough from the storm, it hasn't gone away. The doctor says it's from breathing smoke and damp air. She looked at Olaf. Your children didn't get sick at all, did they? No, Olaf said simply. Dry wood burns clean. Clean fire makes less smoke, and warmth helps people stay healthy. That statement hung in the air like a verdict. This wasn't just about comfort or fuel economy. This was about children's health, about families surviving Minnesota winters, without illness, without suffering. One by one, men began approaching Olaf. Would you help me build one? The Norwegian shipwright who'd been called mad and foolish was suddenly the most sought-after builder in Pine Ridge. If this story's changing how you think about innovation and survival, hit that like button right now and subscribe to Winds of Thought for more forgotten wisdom that still works today. Drop a comment. Would you build a shed house if you were homesteading in a cold climate? By late spring 1890, Olaf had helped design double-shell structures for 12 families. He didn't charge for his expertise. He considered it community knowledge to be shared freely. Jacob Lindstrom became Olaf's most dedicated student. By winter 1891-92, 23 families within 50 miles were living in variations of what they'd begun calling shed houses or Norwegian doubles. The technique spread through Scandinavian immigrant communities first, but soon even American-born settlers who'd mocked the concept were adopting it. The evidence was too compelling to ignore. Word reached the Minnesota Agricultural Extension Service. By 1893, a field agent traveled to Pine Ridge to document the phenomena. His report, published in the 1894 Minnesota Farm Almanac, included detailed drawings and measurements. He calculated that the average shed house reduced winter fuel consumption by 52% compared to standard frontier cabins, while improving interior comfort and extending structural lifespan. Families living in shed houses also reported fewer respiratory illnesses during winter months. The combination of warmer temperatures and cleaner-burning fires created healthier living conditions. But perhaps the most remarkable legacy was how Olaf's innovation influenced modern building science. The principle he employed, using an air gap and protective outer shell to manage moisture and provide thermal buffering, is fundamentally identical to what modern engineers call a rain screen or ventilated facade. Contemporary building codes now recommend similar designs for long-term structural durability and energy efficiency. The double-wall construction Olaf built in 1888 anticipated by nearly a century what building scientists would discover in the 1970s and 1980s. What frontier neighbors called wasteful and foolish turned out to be profoundly advanced engineering disguised in simple lumber and common sense. Olaf himself never promoted his design as revolutionary. When asked about it in later years, he shrugged and said, "In Bergen, boats that don't breathe rot within 5 years. Houses are the same. Keep the wood dry, let the air move, protect what needs protecting. This isn't new, it's just correct." He lived in his shed house until his death in 1924 at age 73. The structure stood solid and sound, requiring minimal maintenance over those 36 years. When workers finally dismantled it in 1967, not because it failed, but because the family wanted something larger, they found the original log cabin inside in nearly perfect condition. 80 years of Minnesota weather had barely touched the protected core. The neighbors stopped laughing and started learning, because sometimes the person everyone calls crazy is the only one who actually understands what's happening. Sometimes what looks like waste is actually investment. And sometimes building a shed around your house isn't madness, it's exactly what survival requires.